Okay, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm so excited to introduce Ms. Anela Ahmed, who is Admission Officer Coordinator for the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine in the Office of Admissions and Student Programs. She advises and guides potential students on the DVM admission process and assists in the planning and execution of DVM ceremonies and events. She began her academic journey as a transfer student before completing her Bachelor's of Science degree at UC Davis. Prior to her transfer, Anela attended both American River College and Sacramento City College. So welcome, Anela.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go ahead and have our ambassadors introduce themselves. They will also let you know about their transfer journey as well as their current standing in the program and their career focuses. Chantel, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Chantel Johnson. I'm a second year at UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. I was also a transfer student. I transferred from Mount San Antonio College down in the Pomona area of Southern California. I did transfer to UC Davis, where I did graduate with a bachelor's in animal science and management. I did take 2 gap years. I hadn't finished all of my prerequisites for vet school, so I took that time to finish out those prerequisites and get more work experience. Now that I'm in vet school, I'm interested in mixed animal medicine, so practicing on pretty much all species except for exotics, and fish. And then I'm also interested in practice ownership.
Hi, and my name is Riley Garrett. I'm also a second year student at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. I was also a transfer student from community college to finish up my bachelor's degree. I had attended West Valley College in Saratoga, California. I actually spent 4 years there. I did 2 years full time and then another 2 years part time just to finish getting as many of my prerequisites as I could before I transferred to UC Davis to finish my bachelor's degree. I also took 2 gap years as well, but my gap year time, my courses were already done. I was focusing more on finishing up, um, like just getting more hands-on experience to help my application process. My strong passions right now are in feline medicine, but I'm also really interested in internal medicine. And my undergraduate degree, I realize I might not have mentioned that, it was animal science.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Okay, so before I get started, I do want to mention we did leave quite a bit of time after the presentation for questions. So if you do have questions, you can either drop them in the chat or for us to answer them live. That will probably most likely be towards the end of the presentation. Okay. Okay, so for this presentation, we will be discussing how you can navigate from community college, as well as going over the requirements for our program, and then strategies to become a competitive applicant. And then from there, we'll also discuss ways to gain valuable experience as a pre-vet student. And our ambassadors will also be giving examples of what they did when they were in community college, as well as in undergrad. And then from there, we'll go a little bit about how to navigate the application process, and then real quickly cover the application timeline, and then briefly discuss the DVM program and curriculum as well. Okay, and then these are just some fun facts about our school before we do get started. So our veterinary medicine teaching hospital, which is right here on campus, they do see around 70 to 60,000 patients a year. We do receive over 75 million annually for research funding. Right now, we also do have over 34 clinical specialties. And as far as clubs go, I believe that number's gone up by 40, but we have various different student clubs and organizations, both academic and non-academic as well. Our program also does have a very robust scholarship program where every year we do award between 6.5 to 7 million in scholarships. And then as well as we do also have 70 active clinical trials taking place. We currently are ranked #1 in the nation. We actually are one of 2 DVM programs here in California. The other one being Western, which is in Southern California, but we are the only public one here. And then also, we are one of 2 schools that does have the highest median starting salary for graduates. And then also, we are one of those schools that does have the second least median debt of any of the 30 schools, as of a study that was done in 2019. So I will mention for our program, each student does also receive a stipend. That stipend is typically around at 8,100. Sometimes it's more, just depending on how much funding we have for that. And basically that is money that goes directly back to you. So you can pretty much deduct that from the cost of tuition, as it goes both to in-state and out-of-state residents. And then the average starting salary, this was for, I believe, either last year's class or the year prior to that. It was 145,000. I will mention this does vary depending on the practice you enter into and your specialty. But that was pretty much the average. And just being at our school and being exposed to the different patients and hospital settings and professors and everything like that, you will be exposed to different and unique caseloads. Which will just further enhance your learning already.
There we go. So for community college, some of the really important things are, of course, aiming for a high GPA, that 3.7 plus. But also we want to make sure that we're forming really good study habits that are going to carry into once you do transfer and beyond into your post-grad programs. Research research transfer requirements, and choosing a major. Those kinds of things are more for what you're interested in, as well as still thinking about what the vet school that you plan on applying to requires as far as prerequisites. So really, you don't necessarily have to major in animal science. You can major in whatever you want, just making sure that those vet school prerequisites are fulfilled. Some might say that majoring in something that's not particularly animal science related gives you, I guess, a better picture of what the world is like, and it makes you more well-rounded. And so it just kind of diversifies your application a little bit more as far as what major you are. If you're interested in the sciences, you don't have to be an animal science major. You can major in chemistry, you can major in biochemistry, things like that. But as far as animal science, that's not really a requirement, especially for UC Davis School of Vet Med. Joining clubs and getting involved is really important. That'll help you to diversify all of the different extracurricular activities you add to your application. And so being involved in either pre-veterinary clubs on your campus, or any clubs that you're interested in, like dance clubs, pottery classes, things like that are just outside of I guess, your professional development. Those can also be really important in making you a more well-rounded student in general. It's really important to build those connections. I know we've kind of transitioned into the realm of Zoom class, and it may be a hybrid course, or you have the option to attend class online. But connecting with your professors and advisors is still really important. If you are attending classes online, I know I did for the majority of my undergrad classes. I was still emailing, attending office hours, and just trying to make that connection with my professors. And then as far as the advisors that I came across during undergrad, I made sure that I was meeting with them more than once a semester, and then once I transferred to Davis, more than once a quarter, to make sure that not only do they know me personally, but make sure that I'm still on the right track to achieving my goal of getting into vet school. As far as veterinary professionals, this is important because, as we'll go over, one of the requirements for vet school applications, you have letters of recommendation, and one of them does have to come from a veterinarian. And so building connections with veterinary professionals will not only give you that opportunity, but you'll also potentially get different opportunities outside of school to work with them and gain that hands-on experience, whether that's as a volunteer, as an intern, working part-time. I was a student that had to work full-time because I did have to fund my education. And so I was able to work really closely with a lot of different types of veterinary professionals, whether they were DVMs or researchers. And so having that variety in those different connections that you build is really going to add to the variety of experiences that you are able to take advantage of. Um, Talking about all of that hands-on experience, it is important to keep a log. Mostly because the vet school application does require you to have like really an estimated idea. It doesn't have to be exact, but an estimated idea of how many veterinary hours or animal related experience hours you have. Every school is different, as we'll go over, but there are some schools that require a minimum number of hours. And so as you move through the community college and undergraduate experience, these are things that you want to keep in mind. Okay, and so tips for transferring to a four-year school to complete a bachelor's. Like I talked about, we definitely want to make sure we're maintaining that high GPA, especially throughout the pre-vet coursework, so those prerequisites. And then as far as advising, UC Davis School, the undergraduate or main campus, they have a pre-health office for you to have a more tailored experience as far as what your goals are for what kind of um, edu what kind of professional program you want to enter into, whether that is medical school, nursing school. I think they also have dentistry, and then they do have a pre-vet advisor as well. Um, and so it is important to not only talk with your advisors, just your general advisor for your major, but also your pre-health advisor to make sure that you're essentially tailoring your program to get into the program once you finish undergrad. One really cool thing at UC Davis that's open to all undergrad students and non-undergrad if you've already graduated. We do have the pre-health conference coming up on October 18th. And like I said, it is open to non-UC Davis students. It's pretty much all professional, all pre-health, so including med students, including nursing students, all like PA, nursing, I think I already said that, but pretty much all the disciplines in the health professions. Um, as far as getting involved, I know I already talked about it, but specific to UC Davis, and I personally have experience with these clubs. I was part of PSSD, which is Pre-Vet Students Supporting Diversity. They offered mentorship. We actually had a mentorship program with the veterinary school students. So they pair you up with a vet student as an undergrad, and you're essentially just kind of learning what things are like. Straight from the horse's mouth per se. I was able to ask my vet student mentor all of those, really pressing questions that I had that I wasn't able to get answered from an advisor or, from sessions like this. So I was able to ask them like, how much is your rent? Are you able to afford things like that? So it was a really unique opportunity being part of that club. They also did offer field trips, not as much anymore, but that's something that they're looking forward to in the future. I was also part of the Vet Aid Club, which did give me a lot of hands-on opportunities. This club is really unique because they tend to partner with different individuals that allow the undergrad students to get more experience in clinical skills aspect of things. And so you're learning how to do injections, you're learning how to get a TPR on your patients, which is temperature, pulse, and respirations. Um, and so just different things like that that are really important if you are trying to get a job in the clinic. You want to have a good foundation in those basic skills. Another club I wasn't part of, but I heard really great things about is 27 Heartbeats. They worked a lot with animal shelters, doing making sure students were connected with getting that sort of experience, just general animal care. And they did also offer field trips. I'm not really sure post-COVID if they're still doing that, but I know pre-COVID they were definitely into it. I did touch on mentorship already, but building a really diverse network. I know that's pretty difficult. That's something that I'm currently still working on too, just like finding, what is a good mentor, who can be a mentor, things like that. But really anyone that is helping you in your journey can be considered a mentor. That might be a professor or a guidance counselor. It might be a manager at the clinic that you work at. It might be an RVT that you work with, a registered vet tech, and just anyone who can provide any sort of support for you, or even those letters of recommendation later on when you are filling out your application.
Perfect. And before we move on, Riley, do you want to share any of your experiences as far as your involvement in the clubs during undergrad?
Of course, yeah. So with my route, I think I mentioned I did 4 years of community college before transferring over to Davis undergrad to finish my bachelor's degree. In community college, I didn't really get too involved with clubs. Similar to as Chantel mentioned, I was working full time during that, so it was a little hard to balance that. However, once I transferred to Davis, I did look at what clubs I can get involved in. Unfortunately, my transfer time to Davis was during the COVID pandemic, so there wasn't too many clubs I could do in person, but I was able to join both the Vet Aid Club as well as the Pre-Vet Students Supporting Diversity, and both of those clubs held online Zoom talks where they would talk about mentorship. They would even have little trivia sessions to talk about different veterinary medic topics. They would do Zoom sessions with different veterinary school admissions teams. So basically, I think if you have the time, definitely recommend getting involved in those. I do wish I would have tried to look more into seeing if my community college had a lot of clubs. There wasn't too much information available to me at that time, but I do definitely recommend getting involved in clubs. It's a great thing.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along. This slide is really it's a website that UC Davis offers anyone to visit, and it's a career planning roadmap. It's unique in that it really helps you to kind of see what your potential journey um, you know, down the career path that you choose, whether that is vet med specific or not. It just kind of helps you to tailor, what your interests are and what that's going to look like as far as your education goes. All right. And so applying thoughtfully, this was a really large part of my application process. So we'll spend a little bit of time on this. One of the main things for me, it's the second main bullet point, but tuition cost. Like I said, I am a student who has to fund my own education. And so tuition was a huge part of my decision for what schools I was going to apply to and what schools I would leave off of my list. Um, that was number one for me. Number two, I would say definitely location, mostly because I am a California resident, and so that meant that I automatically had in-state residency for any of the schools that I applied to in California, which we talked about. One was Western, and the other is UC Davis School of Vet Med. Other things, it was very low on my list. It was more a want, not an absolute need, but I knew I didn't want to be anywhere that it like was really cold and snowed for part of the year. So that was kind of like, of my list, which ones where does it snow? And that's like one less that I would apply to. Um, But the prerequisites are really important. Those are your requirements. Every school is different, and so it is really important for you to check each individual school that is on your list to make sure that you are satisfying those requirements. The reason being, if you are not satisfying like just even one class for that school, your application will be basically it's pulled from the running of getting in. Or getting to that next level of an interview, because the requirements is one of the basic kind of it's like at the basis of the application process. Um, Special interests. I knew that I wanted to practice mixed medicine, so I wanted to go somewhere um, that had livestock and that had a robust program that tailored my education in that area of my interest. And so if you have a special interest in research, if you have a special interest in, say, exotics, Riley talked about being into feline medicine. UC Davis is really cool because the Feline Med Club is here. So just having that knowledge, and you can reach out to the admissions office at each of those schools to see if they have those things that are very specific to your needs. Um, as far as the length of the program and the clinical year setup, the length of the program it is dependent on the school. UC Davis School of Vet Med is a 4-year program. And I want to say University of Arizona is a 3-year program. Some schools overseas will be longer programs, as the way their school system is set up, they enter into vet school right after their what would be considered their high school years. So it really depends, if you want to be in vet school for 5 years, go for it. But I think for the most part, the United States schools are mostly 4-year programs. And then that last year, that clinical year is going to be important because depending on what school you go to, they may or may not have a teaching hospital, which you will be able to rotate through for your clinical year. The rotations are anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, and you're on different services. So, for example, the small animal service rotation at UC Davis, you'll be doing cardiology, dermatology, emergency medicine, surgery, things like that. If a school that you attend does not, if there is a school on your list that does not have a teaching hospital, and that's something that you really want because that means you don't have to travel for your clinical years, or your clinical year, that might be a reason that maybe you would not want to apply. It's all just a matter of what your specific needs are. Obviously, the clinical year is way down the line, and we're talking about at the application stage, but kind of think about what your future needs might be, or if you just know yourself really well, you might know what you want 4 years from now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for all that, Chantel. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a bit more about the basic application process, what kind of requirements you need to make sure your application is complete. So as you can see on this brief overview slide, the first thing is going to be making sure that all of your prerequisite courses are in order. So we will have some upcoming slides discussing which prerequisites are required to get into UC Davis Vet School, which ones you can take at the community college level, and which ones have to be taken at a 4-year level. UC Davis is, I believe, the only veterinary school in the nation that does require a bachelor's degree. So that degree needs to be completed by the time of the start of the program. I believe you're allowed to have about 3 courses in progress during the time that your application is submitted up until vet school starts, but that degree does have to be done by time vet school starts as well. We do require 3 electronic letters of recommendation. Those are submitted through the MCAS system directly. They're not mailed into us, so make sure to keep that in mind. Make sure your letter writers have the information they need to be able to submit those, and we have a whole slide discussing that as well. Our program does require a minimum of 180 hours of veterinary experience. This does differ school to school. Some schools don't have hour requirements and some schools have more hours that they require. So it's important to just double check with each program that you're planning to apply for to ensure that you're meeting their requirements. And we have a whole slide where we're going to talk about what qualifies as veterinary experience versus what would be categorized as just animal experience. The MCAS, as I mentioned, that is the Veterinary Medical College's application service. So that is where your primary application will be submitted, as well as your letters of recommendation. We also have a separate supplemental application. So once your VMCAS application is submitted and verified, then you receive the link and information to fill out the supplemental application and pick which letters of recommendation you want the school to look at. And then if your application gets looked at and it's complete and you meet the qualifications, get invited for an interview, which we will be discussing, then we have the multiple mini interview format, otherwise known as the MMI, and we have a whole slide where I'll be talking about that as well. Okay, great. So this is a slide talking about the prerequisite courses that the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine requires that can be completed at a community college. And so these courses, you're looking at general biology. We do require 2 semesters, both with labs, or if you're on the quarter system, that's equivalent to 3 quarters, I believe. Is it 3 or 2 quarters, Anila?
It's going to be two for both biology and chemistry. It's going to be 2 semesters or 3 quarters, all with lab.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Just want to make sure I'm giving you guys the right information. So yeah, so 2 semesters with lab or 3 quarters with lab. Same with general chemistry. Organic chemistry is going to be 2 semesters, 1 with lab or 2 quarters. However, if your school has a series that has 3 quarters, we will likely be requiring that you complete all 3 of those quarters. For physics, we require 2 semesters with no labs. That would be equivalent to 3 quarters. And statistics is going to be 1 semester, and we have flexibility with the statistics course you take. It can be a major specific course. So for example, there's biostats, which I believe is like what I had taken, versus there's psychology stats, there's business stats. So it's important to just make sure to even check our website for those articulation agreements and make sure it's a course that meets our prerequisite requirements. We do accept online courses from regionally accepted accredited universities. And same thing, you just want to make sure to check our website for those requirements to make sure it does meet as a transferable course for our system. We do allow AP or IB credit to be accepted for these prerequisite courses. You do have to have a score of 3 or higher that was earned on those tests, and you do have to have it transferred to your undergraduate college. You need to make sure your school accepts that and it is listed on your transcript appropriately. And all prerequisite courses do have to have a solid C or higher. So that does mean, unfortunately, a grade of C minus does not meet the requirement. It has to be a C or higher.
Thank you. And I also do want to mention, so with the lower division prerequisite courses, like Riley said, they can be completed at a community college, and they are also going to be weighed just the same, they're going to have the same value as courses from, like, let's just say UC Davis or even Stanford, or let's just say you go to Sac State. They're all weighed equally. So essentially, if we always recommend, if you are able to get it done at community college, to get it done there, just because you'll also notice there is going to be a difference between where you take it. Like, for example, I did start off by taking my general education courses at a community college, and then when I transferred over to UC Davis, I went from like being in a class of 30 students to being in a class that had like 400 to 500 students. So depending on just like, your learning style and everything like that, that's something to take into consideration. And then if you two both also want to just go over your experience with taking prerequisite courses or just courses in general at community college, that'd also be good.
Of course, yeah.
Can you repeat that again? Because I'm sure there's going to be a question. So you guys do accept community college?
Exactly, yeah, and yeah, I can't emphasize enough that the courses, because we get this question all the time as well. So whether you get them done here, done at a community college or a 4-year university, they're going to be weighed equally. And like from an admission standpoint, they'll be weighed equally. Also with the prerequisite courses, let's just say you do have to retake one. Completing it at a community college is gonna, still gonna, we're specifically looking at GPAs, which we'll get to in a later slide. But those can, I mentioned, be completed at a community college, and they hold the same weight as if you were to complete them anywhere else.
But what if somebody says, I heard from my neighbors, friends, cousins, uncle, brother, what would you tell them that? Because just
I
want
would say
to
that's a complete misconception. You'll see in the later slide exactly how our applications are ranked. And you'll also notice from that, we're not looking at the institution attended. I know both Riley and Chantel did go to UC Davis for undergrad, but honestly, it doesn't matter where you get your bachelor's degree from. Where you attended these courses is not at all part of the admissions ranking whatsoever. And even let's just say you need to enhance your GPA. So you're looking at taking additional courses, having like either repeating prerequisite courses you didn't that you want to retake, or taking additional science courses. We're specifically looking at those GPAs. We're not looking at where those courses were completed. And again, this is due to equity reasons. And it's purely the GPA is the number one thing we're looking at. So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for all that information, Anila. I definitely appreciate you expanding on that. Yes, I can definitely talk about my experience with the prerequisite courses that I took at community college. So I did do my biology series, my general chemistry, and my organic chemistry at community college. And I cannot stress enough how good of a decision I think that was, because like Anila mentioned, you have the smaller class sizes, which really helps for being able to get your questions answered, and feel like you can even build more of a connection with your professors. It's also so much more affordable. At least for me, it really helped, especially since I was having to work full time to already support my career. Taking the courses at a community college level allowed me to save money and better finance my education. I did take physics and statistics at the 4-year level. I took those once I transferred to UC Davis. But if I could go back and do it again, I think I would have tried to take those at community college. The only reason why I took them at the 4-year level is it just so happened when I was ready to transfer that I still needed to take those courses. But yeah, I can't stress enough how important and how valuable I think it is to take opportunities to take the courses at community college if you can.
Yeah, so similar to pretty much echoing what Anila and Riley have said, specifically what Riley was talking about with like the tailored kind of education. It's more personal, smaller class size. That makes a huge difference, especially for someone like me, where like physics does not come naturally. I don't think physics goes naturally to anyone. But I was different in that I had not taken physics or statistics yet. And I actually decided to wait. So I completed my bachelor's education. My major did not require those two classes. Um, and so I basically was like, I can't do it here. Davis was on a quarter system. I was struggling to fit, like, just to, stay afloat with that and do well in my major required classes. And so the summer after I finished my degree, that's when I took physics. And I did go back to community college for that, especially because, as we'll get into, there is a science GPA, and I knew that, and I wanted to make sure that I performed well in physics. So I didn't want to have to retake that class. It was tough going through it once. So set yourself up for success. Take as many of those prerequisite courses at the community college level as possible.
And then I just want to really quickly address one question that we just got in the chat, just because it's to do with the slide as well. So it's asking if we take into account the time it took to complete the bachelor's degree, so whether if it took you 4 to 5 years to complete the prerequisite courses, or if you were to be able to get them all done at once. And the answer is no, it doesn't. We understand that our applicants come from all different walks of life. We have even applicants that come that have career changes, and even applying like after 5 or 6 to 7 to 8 years. And again, we will be going over the admissions ranking and how applicants are ranked, and that is not at all considered.
Thank you for that, Anila. Yeah, I think I had mentioned, like I said, I did 4 years at community college and then 2 years at Davis. So I took 6 years to get my bachelor's degree. So yeah, we completely understand that. And so this slide is now talking about the upper division prerequisite courses. So contrary to the other slide, these courses do have to be taken at that 4-year university level. So typically at the 3rd or 4th year, so the junior or senior level. These courses do not require labs, and we also do accept online courses for these prerequisites as well. Just again, you're going to want to make sure that it meets our articulation agreements on our website. And so these courses are going to be biochemistry, and the important thing to note is it must include metabolism. It should have a focus on metabolism. Metabolism should be in the name. Otherwise, it may not be accepted, and we do require 1 semester or quarter of biochemistry. Systemic physiology should be a course covering all the major body systems, so it needs to have that focus there. We require 1 semester or quarter of that. Alternatively, if your school doesn't have a systemic physiology course, we do accept upper division anatomy and physiology 1 and 2 for that, but then you would have to take like both of those together to meet that requirement. And then there's also genetics. I'm a course focusing on gene expression that we require 1 semester or 1 quarter. So again, these need to be at that 3rd or 4th year, so the junior or senior level. I know some schools may have like elementary or foundation classes. So typically it wouldn't be those ones. It's going to be those upper division courses for these 3 requirements. All right, and then this is a slide that we're going to be talking a little bit about those electronic letters of recommendation, otherwise known as ELORs. And so what are they? They're basically going to be your mentors are going to assess your knowledge of veterinary medicine or your academic abilities, your interpersonal skills, your communication skills, your leadership skills. Basically, they're going to help write a well-rounded letter of you and your passions for going to vet med, your skills, and why you would be a successful veterinary student and contribute to this profession well. So to talk about this brief process, it is submitted through MCAS only. So your writers, like I mentioned earlier, they're not going to be sending in paper letters. They're going to have to submit these electronically through MCAS. The system typically lets you input their contact information and it'll send them a link directly to fill out. And make sure they get that in time. We have another slide that will be talking all about making sure to follow up with your mentors and how to request letters early, etc. So I'll talk about that more in a second. For these letters, at least one does have to be from a practicing veterinarian who has directly supervised you. So let's say you were in school and you took like a biochemistry course and the professor was a veterinarian. That wouldn't count as your letter from a veterinarian. It would have to be a veterinarian that directly supervised you, working in that clinical setting. You're able to submit up to 6 letters of recommendation through the MCAS system. However, UC Davis is only going to be looking at 3 once you submit your supplemental application. So you'll get to select which 3 that we look at, ensuring that one of those is from a veterinarian. Your writers and raters are going to evaluate you in several categories. It's basically using the Likert scale, and that does assign a score to each letter of recommendation that the admissions committee looks at. And like I said, it's going to be ratings just on things like leadership skills, communication skills, animal handling, and more. And so you can include up to 6 letters of recommendation in your MCAS application. Like if you requested, the full 6, or if you only request the minimum 3, it's not going to make you look any different as long as you meet that minimum requirement, that 3 letters of recommendations. If 3 letters of recommendation are not submitted, or if you don't have one from a veterinarian, then unfortunately the application won't be considered complete and it wouldn't be able to be reviewed. And all letters do have to be submitted and received by the deadline. This is why it can be helpful to request more than that minimum 3. I know in my situation, I requested 4, which came in handy because one of my writers almost didn't make the deadline. And so it's really helpful to try to, if you can, request more than 3 letters just in case someone, accidentally doesn't make the deadline or they run out of time. And the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and talk more about what kinds of recommenders to request letters from in that detail.
And also just to reemphasize that, just looking at applications from the back end of things, for the last 2 years in a row, the VEMCAS system has had over 4,000 pending ELORs. And so we always recommend trying to get at least more than just the 3 that we require for our program, just because if you don't have that third one in, then unfortunately you will have to wait until the next year's application cycle to apply. And it's a really common problem that we have within our program. But Riley will go over more about like what you can do to make sure your evaluators do get that in.
But they get notified when the letter is uploaded, right?
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. All right. Yeah. So this is going to be a slide talking about how to choose the right references for your letters of recommendation, and tips for kind of making sure that those get submitted in time. So the most important thing is to make sure that you have a reference who is going to be able to represent you, advocate on your behalf, and who is going to be able to write you a positive letter of recommendation. I have heard previously, from people that maybe they've seen letters submitted that weren't in the most positive of light. So it is important to stress to your recommenders that you're looking for someone who is willing and ready to write a positive letter of recommendation. We do ideally recommend that you select references highlighting different parts of your background to help you look like a more well-rounded individual. So maybe you can do like an academic instructor, as well as a veterinarian that you've worked with, maybe a research mentor or an employer supervisor. If you were involved in some clubs that had some great leadership skills, for example, an extracurricular advisor would be another great fit to have advocate on your behalf and write a letter of recommendation for you. Some people even use coaches or other individuals who know their character and their motivation well and know how much they want how much they want to get into veterinary school. In my experience for my letters, I personally did do 2 veterinarians and the hospital manager. They were all at the same hospital. Of course, we do recommend if you're able to diversify that more, though, that would be great. In my situation, those were just the people I felt like knew me best and knew my passion because of how long I had been with the organization. But in general, it is great if you have diverse perspectives. So don't think that you need like all 3 to be from a veterinarian. As long as you have 1 from a veterinarian and you have that minimum of 3 letters that makes it in, you're good. And again, requesting extra letters just to make sure that you definitely have 3 in for the deadline is what we recommend. It's important to ask early and communicate clearly with what you're looking for in deadlines. So I did make sure, for example, that I asked for my letters of recommendation pretty early on in the application. I think my second cycle that I used the application, I asked for my letters like right in January, and then I kept reminding a little closer to the deadline, like, okay, March, a little bit in June, July, just to really make sure they still had on their radar. It helped make sure that my mentor was even paying attention more to what I was doing so that they were able to really see what features I had that would help them with writing their letters. It's also helpful to send like a resume or even your personal statement to your mentor writer so that they have just an even more full, well-rounded picture of you outside of the setting that they normally see you in. When you choose a deadline for your letters, you don't have to make it the deadline the application is due. Like in my experience, I chose to make the deadline for my writers, so it sends them that information saying this is when the letter is due. I made that a couple weeks before the deadline for MCAS, and that helped me because one of my writers missed the initial deadline that I set, so I did have to resend them to the link, and then they made sure they got it in time. But it does help because I know even for me, I've had issues sometimes where I procrastinate and I almost miss a deadline. And we know that our reference writers, especially if they're a veterinarian or a supervisor, that they're going to be exceptionally busy. And so it's important to just make sure we're following up on them gently, of course, and helping ensure that they're able to get the application, the letters of recommendation in time for us. And so like I mentioned, just want to ensure availability and willingness, choosing people who are supportive and excited to help recommend you. You could even say something like, I'm looking to apply to veterinary school, and I was hoping you could write me a positive letter of recommendation. Is that something you're willing to do? Is that something you are available to do? Do you have the time to work that into your schedule? And most mentors they're going to be excited. They're going to be happy that you're looking to apply, and they'll be more than welcome to get that letter in. So like I said, academic instructors, veterinary professionals, research mentors, especially if you have experience in the research field, those mentors can be, just great to highlight your analytical skills and, your dedication to the work. Employers or supervisors, even if they're not in the veterinary medical field, that can even be great to give a well-rounded picture of you, how you are outside of the vet field. Extracurricular advisors, and like I said, coaches, community leaders, etc., other people who know you and your character.
I have a question, Riley. So let's say the deadline to submit the letter of recommendation is September 30th. Do you think that asking them September 27th is an appropriate date, or how early they should ask someone to write them a letter of recommendation?
Of course, yeah. So for the initial asking them to write the letter, you want to make sure you're giving them as much time as possible. So I would say asking them earlier is better than later, so months before the application is due, and then setting that deadline at least a couple weeks to maybe even a month before the final MCAS deadline, because as Anila stressed, if your letters of recommendation aren't in time, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that, and you would have to wait for the next application cycle. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend like letting them know like this is the deadline that's actually due, because then there's just more of that risk that if something were to pop up, that they might end up missing getting that letter in. So I would say ask months in advance for the letter and set the deadline ideally to a couple weeks to a month before the true deadline on MCAS, just so that if they missed it, you're able to resend that link, and then ideally, they'll have that in their head of like, oh my goodness, I already missed like the first deadline, and they're going to get it in right away for you. And just gentle reminders.
Early bird gets the worm.
Exactly. All right, great. And so this slide is really helpful for the application process. It's basically identifying that difference between what counts as veterinary experience versus what counts as animal experience. I know for me, when I was applying to veterinary school, this was one of the trickiest parts on the application. So here we have basically the definition that VEMCAS uses. So veterinary experience is going to be defined as any veterinary clinical, agribusiness, or health science experiences that took place under the supervision of a veterinarian. So again, that's the important part, under the direct supervision of a veterinarian. If you were working with animals, but there was no veterinarian there, the veterinarian was not supervising you, then unfortunately that wouldn't count as veterinary experience, but it would count as animal experience. So you could still put it on there. So animal experience is anything that does not happen under the supervision of a veterinarian. This could include farm or ranch experience, maybe you had 4-H club experience, animal training, animal shelter work, or wildlife rescue and rehabilitation where you were not working with a vet. For veterinary experience, our school does require a minimum of 180 hours of experience. We do sometimes get applicants who have been working at a veterinary clinic for years and they have thousands of hours, but that doesn't make them look any better than it would make you, for say. So we just want to make sure you have a minimum of 180 hours. We want to ensure that you get a good grasp of what the field is like and that you have that experience coming in. And I do want to stress that online veterinarian or animal experience will not count. I know during my application cycle, especially during the COVID years initially, I think Loop Abroad was offering online vet experience programs, but no, those would not count. It has to be things that were in person. And animal experience, we don't have a minimum requirement you need. It's just the 180 hours with a vet is the minimum part.
Thank you. I'm also for this slide, I'm going to have both of you share your experience with gaining veterinary experience and how you navigated that and were able to obtain hours. But before we get into that, I do want to emphasize now for veterinary experience for our program, it is a minimum requirement of having 180 hours. With that being said, I know oftentimes we get the question if I have hundreds and hundreds of hours, is that going to increase my admissions ranking or give me a more competitive application? And the answer is no. On the front end of things, like I mentioned, it is going to be a minimum requirement. So the main thing here is we're looking to see that you have good quality hours and that you do understand what a veterinarian does. And I also just to further emphasize that each year we get applicants, like the range of veterinary experience hours will vary from 180 hours to 40,000 hours. So it appears like the average typically is about 2 to 3,000 hours per applicant. We actually stopped including those statistics on our admission statistics pages on our website, just because it can be misleading. Students do end up thinking they need to take a gap year or two to gain those thousands of hours, when in actuality that is not the case at all. It is a minimum requirement for our program. So as long as you have the 180 hours and they are good quality hours, you'll be in good standing. And then I'll both have you both go ahead and share your experience with gaining veterinary experience.
Perfect. Thank you, Anil. I definitely appreciate you expanding on that. So I can go ahead and talk a little bit about my experiences. So the first chunk of my experiences were taken with my time working with a veterinarian at a nonprofit cat rescue. So this was a cat rescue that I had been involved with for many years, from 2017 through 2021. I had started as a volunteer, worked up to clean care, worked up to adoptions lead, and then foster coordinator. And so anything that was not with a veterinarian, I didn't count in my veterinary experience section. That stuff was animal experience. But I did make sure to keep track of the hours I had with the veterinarian, as we had certain days that a veterinarian was on standby and I was able to work with them, and help do routine wellness checks for the kittens, for example, or help do ultrasound guided cystocentesis with them. Anything with a veterinarian, I made sure to have that hours counted separately, and I kept it organized on a spreadsheet. So that was probably about, I'd say, somewhere around 200 hours that I had accumulated during my years working at the cat rescue side by side with a veterinarian. But like I said, I had, all the other hours went in the animal experience section. And then after my time at the cat rescue, I did go work at a VCA clinic. My job was like split between being front desk reception and going in the back to assist or shadow the doctors. So again, my receptionist stuff was not counted in veterinary experience because that wasn't working directly supervised by the veterinarian. That was counted as separate work experience, but I kept track of the hours that I was shadowing surgeries in the back, or helping monitor surgery, or helping with the doctors performing their examinations and treatments. And so I got about 100 hours there of specifically working directly under supervision of the veterinarian. And that was a small animal, so dog and cat urgent care / general practice, but really lean more towards urgent care. My experience was primarily dogs and cats, though we do recommend, if you're able to diversify your experiences more, it just helps give you a better idea of what you're looking for in this field and what your passions are. And B, can help, you can help see that you're well-rounded and you have different attributes. So for example, I really wish I would have gotten some large animal experience before applying to vet school, as we do work with large animals, and it would have been helpful to have some of that experience on hand.
Can I just like, you guys still asking this question? Riley just said she went to the feline rescue. Now, I have a question. How did you find that? And the first day that you walked in, did they let you go in and help the veterinarian, or what did you do first? What's the first thing they make you do when you show up to?
Of course. Yeah, thank you. I definitely appreciate that question. So for me, when I was in high school and I already knew I was going to be wanting to apply to veterinary school one day, I started trying to look at opportunities to get involved. And so what happened is, me and my mother actually went to the local animal shelter, and we discussed about volunteer opportunities, but their requirement was that you had to be 18 years without an adult to be there, and that just didn't work with my parents' work schedule, unfortunately. And so I was on the car ride home with my mom, and I said, I really love cats, at least. Like, I wish I could find somewhere with cats. And my mom goes, have you reached out to Town Cats, the local, cat rescue? And I said, no, I didn't realize we had a local cat rescue. And so we reached out to their organization. They did allow volunteers 16 and older without a parent, which was really helpful. So my mom went with me to the organization to talk about what I could do. But yeah, I started as a volunteer, and as a volunteer, I was not going to be working directly with a veterinarian. My responsibilities were scooping cat litter boxes. They were going to be washing dishes, just cleaning cages, and making sure that I was monitoring, like if there was diarrhea in a cage or something like that. That kind of stuff wasn't working side by side with the veterinarian, and so about 2 years later, I got hired onto the clean care staff, where I was pretty much doing my same volunteer experiences, but I was also then in charge of administering medications and vaccines. It wasn't until I got into my shelter adoptions role and foster coordinator role that I was really able to get that hands-on one-on-one veterinary experience with the veterinarian, because those were roles where I needed to be able to just do more skills with them. And if the cats needed certain diagnostic treatments, for example, then I'd be able to work side by side with the veterinarian getting those done. But exactly, starting out in the shelter originally, I wasn't getting right away one-on-one contact with the veterinarian. You do have to work your way up there. So it just starts getting your foot in the door, and showing that you have that dedication. And even just letting the team there know, like, hey, this is what I want. I want to go into vet school. What can I do to help me like get that opportunity to work with a veterinarian with you guys? And really just, yeah, getting your foot in the door. Because like I said, the first place I reached out to was a separate shelter, and it didn't work out. So definitely don't get discouraged either if you're not finding the right places. I would say reach around, look for what interests you, and see what they can offer you and what you can offer them.
I have another question actually. What would the difference be between shadowing and clinical experience, and why would you need to get both?
Of course, yeah. So for me, for shadowing, I thought that was things like if I was going in the back, for example, and I was just watching the doctor performing a surgery. Like for example, we had a leg amputation where I was able to watch the doctor do it and I was able to ask questions, but it wasn't me actually putting my hands on the animal. I wasn't actually doing things. I was at that point watching the surgery, asking questions, maybe helping monitor the vitals a little bit. So I think that is more so what considers as shadowing, versus I feel like clinical experience is more so when you have your hands on, being supervised by the vet, of course, and you're doing the procedures like like administering the vaccinations, for example, or administering the fluids. And I think if Anila or Chantel has a better definition, then totally, you guys can jump in as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. But in terms of like from the admission standpoint, when looking at veterinary experience, if the shadowing hours were under the supervision of a veterinarian, you could still classify that as a veterinary experience as well.
Thank you.
So the key of this whole thing was that it's a process. It's not something that my camera's not working. Sorry. It's not something that you're gonna walk in there and you're gonna be assisting with surgeries the first day. So if some of you have that expectation, and actually I have this from a friend of mine who's a veterinarian, don't show up the first day and demanding things to the veterinarians, because I will tell you this, and this is from my friend, so I have permission to share this. They will show you the door. So you have to build up, and your first day showing up, you are most likely cleaning cages. Um, and some of you are saying, well, I don't know, like every town and community has an animal shelter. And, most of us are not as, uh, gung ho as Riley, which you started in high school knowing what you wanted to do. So if you're over 18, you're okay. And every place has them. And actually, right now, because of the economic, there's a lot of abandoned dogs and cats. So animal shelters are really, really busy. And so volunteering at them, every community has them. There's also zoos, although I think zoos are pretty hard to volunteer at. I don't know. I've never tried, but yeah. So I think, and thank you, Riley, for sharing your experience, because I think it's really important.
And then Chantel, do you want to real quickly share your experience as well? And yeah, so I also just want to emphasize, like we like just working with our current vet students, they even have to like in order to gain that experience. I've even heard stories where they've had to reach out to multiple people, whether that be even cold calls or emails, even to the hundreds sometimes before they even get a response. So we do understand on the back end of things that it might not always be easy to gain experience, or you might not have the resources available to gain like experience in certain fields and sectors, but especially based on where you're located, which is why we made the veterinary experience a minimum requirement. So yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned cold calling, cold emailing. That was how I got an interview at the practice that I ended up working at for 2 years. Um, Leading up to that, though, um, I probably submitted like 50 different applications, and this was all for kennel assistant or kennel hand or animal care assistant, um, without the expectation that I would be doing those vaccines. I would be, learning how to do blood draw, monitoring anesthesia. I was just trying to get into a practice. And everyone had closed their doors to me. No one wanted to hire me because I had none of that experience. So one program that was actually really unique to UC Davis undergrad was Mercer Veterinary Clinic, and then they eventually started their sister organization, DPAW, in Davis. That was a free, accessible veterinary care clinic that ran monthly, that allowed undergraduate students to gain the clinical skills and also, learn how a practice works, learn how to handle and restrain cats and dogs. And just, your first experience is not going to be as you get hired onto in a clinical setting at a working practice. So I attended a couple of those clinics first, did my first vaccine, was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And then took that, updated my resume, and was like, I've given like 3 vaccines, so I know how to do it. And when I did finally, I was still cold calling everywhere. That one practice was like, okay, let's have a talk. So I got to do a phone interview, where once I had that phone interview, that's where I was able to prove that this is something that I want to do. This is something that I'm working towards and have been working towards. If I'm given this opportunity, like, you won't regret it. And yeah, they definitely took that chance on me because, like I said, I had only given like 3 vaccines up to that point. But they let me in the door for the first couple months working there, and it was part-time because I was at that point, I was in my final year of undergrad. Um, I was definitely cleaning kennels. I was restocking blood tubes. I was washing surgical instruments. I didn't really touch a patient until we were really short-staffed, and they were like, Chantel, can you get a weight on this cat? And I was like, oh my gosh, they're letting me touch this animal. Great, cool. And so kind of from there, once I was in that clinical setting, asking questions, asking, can I try that? More just kind of not being as, like, obviously I didn't really know much, but showing that initiative to learn and showing that I was trainable, showing that I had that curiosity. It definitely propelled my experience in that clinic. In the 2 years, I started as a kennel assistant, very, very basic knowledge, and I worked all the way up to shift lead, where I was monitoring anesthesia. I was like running the schedule of the day, working really closely with the practice manager. So it's very possible, especially in, just a 2 year span of time. But it does take a lot of work, and you're not going to start off, if everyone wants to be doing the blood draw, everyone wants to place that catheter, but there's a step process to it. But yeah, the other experience that I did have was during undergrad. I needed a job once I got to Davis, and I was looking on, I think at the time they were using Handshake. I think they might still use Handshake. But I found a pathology as assistant position, and it was a student position. So I was a necropsy assistant. I had absolutely no skills that pertain to that field whatsoever. So it's very much just a shot in the dark. I think it's really cool that they do sample collection on different animals, and that's basically the most that I understood about that job. But talking with that manager during that interview, hint hint, the interview is like the most important part of you showing your best foot, you letting them know that you are, you're driven, you're curious, you want to learn, and you have goals, and they can help you with that. But yeah, that necropsy assistant position, the manager was like, we don't really need you to have the experience. It is for you to learn. You're a student. We don't expect you to know everything coming in. Just be open. And so I got to work with board certified pathologists. So they were veterinarians that had gone further and specialized in veterinary pathology. And they were anatomic pathologists. So that meant that they were getting whole animal specimens, and they were collecting samples from different organ systems that they needed. And they were also doing research. So I was very fortunate in being afforded that opportunity, because I got to work with specialists, learn what their process was, for getting into vet school and what they did after vet school to get to where they were. And also I got to see a lot of really awesome different species. We did a necropsy on a blue-tongued skink. We got to see a boa constrictor. We got like the organ samples from an elephant. So I didn't get to see the necropsy for the elephant, but just really cool things. All that to say, if I hadn't stepped out of my comfort zone and just put my name in the pot of the application pool, I never would have, had that opportunity. So just because you think you don't have the experience for it doesn't necessarily mean that you absolutely need that experience, as long as you put forth that you're driven, you are trainable, you're showing that curiosity and that passion for learning. A lot of that goes a long way.
I have a question regarding experience for an application. So if I were currently a veterinary assistant, would it look better on my application if I became a RVT first? Or is it just the hours of experience I get underneath direct supervision of a veterinarian that matter, whether I'm an assistant or RVT?
It is my understanding that it's just about having those minimum hours of experience and that it doesn't make you look any better whether you have that RVT certification or not. Again, it's just about meeting that minimum 180 hours of experience.
Okay, thank you so much.
I
Of course, yeah.
will,
If
I will
you're
also
if you're an RVT, you get paid more, right?
You do get paid more. I will say I actually had this question very early on in my educational journey, whether or not I wanted to go the RVT path first and then pursue veterinary DVM degree. And I ultimately decided not to go the RVT route because that is an entirely separate program and certification process that comes with tuition. It comes with clinical hours. It comes with yes, you do get higher pay than a standard veterinary assistant in the clinic, but you also have loans to pay back after you finish that program. And then if you were to pivot and do the DVM program, the prerequisites that are required of the DVM program don't always align with the RVT program. So you'd be doing all of that schooling just to potentially have to do even more schooling, and then you've got like double the amount of loans pretty much. So there is kind of a balance. If there are a lot of benefits to doing the RVT program if that's something that you do want to pursue. We actually, Riley and I have classmates who are RVTs, and that was their first career. And they were like, you know what, I do want more. And so here they are. But it's not an absolute requirement.
And how long does getting an RVT take?
It does depend on the program. I had one friend who did an accelerated program, so she actually finished in 2 years, and it was 2 years of insanity for her. But there are 4-year RVT programs as well.
Yeah, and so if you're taking it at a community college and you're using financial aid, your financial aid runs out after a while. So it's 4 years of Cal grants and I think 6 years of uh, federal grants. And so and there's a lot of private schools that charge like $30,000 to become an RVT, which is really expensive. So the classes don't, um, and so can you tell me what some of the classes you take in RVT versus to prep for vet school? Just
Um, So off the top of my head, when I was looking, this was years ago, but I do remember that some of the classes they took, like they took pharmacology. They did also take they took something that was similar to biochemistry, but it was more associated like directly with like how is your patient going to respond to this certain medication. So it was a lot of what they were learning, a lot of the curriculum was like direct application because essentially it was you're gearing up not to be a doctor, but you are gearing up to best support your vet. That doesn't really transfer to prerequisite requirements like pharmacology, at least for UC Davis School of Vet Med, and for other schools that when I was looking at their curriculum, or their curricular requirements, they did not require pharmacology. That's one thing that's specific. And that's really the only one I know off the top of my head that doesn't transfer. I have
Most of the RVT classes don't transfer.
Yeah, that's right. Just working with applicants as well. Yeah, majority of classes they don't, and the students end up having to retake all the prerequisite courses that are required for a program.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of, it's easier to find and make more money as an RVT, but you're looking at least 3 year and repeating a lot of classes. So
Exactly. Yeah. So that was one of the reasons too why I had originally thought like maybe I should try to go to tech school first to become an RVT. But for me, it was solely from the standpoint of looking at the cost of that degree because vet school was not cheap either. And I was from a financial standpoint where I knew I couldn't really afford to do both. So that's why I set my sights more to just going to vet school. But if it's something where you're really interested in the tech side of things and you're not sure yet about going all the way to become a vet, like Chantel mentioned, we do have classmates that are RVTs and they worked as an RVT for years and then just decided, I want to get more of that standpoint of what a doctor does, like diagnosing and performing surgeries, for example, like that, just that separation from the career, because they are positions that both have their own separate responsibilities, and work together to help the team succeed. And I did want to answer a question I see in the chat saying, would study abroad with a university count as veterinary experience or animal experience if we're working with animals? It is my understanding that, like I said, veterinary experience is going to be something where you're working side by side with that direct supervision of a veterinarian. So as long as it meets that, even if it is, out of the country, study abroad, I believe it should still qualify for that.
Yeah, that's right. But there is also one thing I do want to mention. So if you are receiving course credit for it, so if let's just say that experience is for a particular class, then unfortunately you aren't able to apply that as veterinary experience just because you can't double dip between both of them while getting course credit and veterinary experience. So that's something to take into consideration.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. And I think everything on this slide was covered perfect. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about the multiple mini interviews or MMIs. And so basically what that is it's kind of separate than your traditional interview where you apply to a professional school and you do like a one-on-one session where you're getting questions answered and discussing the whole time. That's not what we do. What we do is the multiple mini interviews because it helps us get a better idea of just your character and your ability to succeed in a professional program. So the way this is done, it measures your communication skills, emotional intelligence, verbal and nonverbal skills. The format uses short, independent assessments in a timed circuit. The next slide is going to dive in more about what exactly that looks like. Typically, you'll get, a question with some time to think about it. You'll have about 7 minutes to answer that question or a series of questions, then a break in between. Exactly. So right here. So if your application is looked at and it meets the requirements and you do end up making that cutoff for being invited to an interview, which is at another slide, then you would be invited in for this interview. And so it's typically 60 candidates a day for 4 days, making a total of 240 candidates. This is done in early December. As you can see, it is virtual. We are still doing currently the online interviews, which is actually really nice, especially if you're an out-of-state student or you're just not able to make the drive up. I know for me, for example, when I applied and I did the virtual interview, I was struggling to get time off work to try to make the drive. So it was really helpful that I didn't have to drive on up because I lived about 3 hours away, which isn't terrible, but it still is a drive. And so with this series, candidates are going to rotate through 10 scenario stations. You do not know the scenario up until you're like in that room and you have that 3 minutes, I believe it is, to review and think about your answer before going in. So it's 7 minutes to answer 3 questions, and you get 3 minutes between each station. So the whole thing ends up being around 100 minutes, give or take. All scores are going to be evaluated and analyzed by a third-party statistician to norm and adjust as needed to account for differences in like the individual raters, for example, and make sure that everything is looked at like on an even playing field. And this basically shows what this looks like. You can see yourself, the applicant, on screen. You're going to be able to see your interviewer on screen. You'll see what station number you're at in the left-hand corner, as well as how much time you have remaining. And you'll have like the question available on the right. I know in my experience for this, for example, I did have my first interviewer, their mic wasn't working at first, but they have things in place to make sure everything gets taken care of to account for, technology not working the best. If you finish a question early, don't feel like you need to fill that silence. If you are satisfied with your answer and is concise, it's fine to leave it there, even if you didn't use the full time. I would say you want to make sure that you're able to get your answer done in time. One of my sessions, I completed my last sentence right before the camera cut off and the room was done. So it's good to just make sure, even try to practice. Like I said, you won't know the exact questions until interview day and you're in each room. But for me personally, I think it might have been BMO or something, but it was a book that was geared towards people applying to medical schools and professional schools that had sample prompts and different tips. And I practiced with those at home. I practiced recording myself because I'm someone who gets really nervous when I know that I'm on camera, even though it's like just a one-on-one little interview at the time. So I practiced a lot in advance just with like different example scenarios. And that's something I really recommend. And time yourself during that practice because it really gives you an idea of what it's going to feel like when you're there day of. And even though it is virtual, still dress for success. I still wore business professional. That's still, like a good recommendation because even though you're not in person, you still want to show that you are professional, and that you really are putting a lot of thought and care into this and your answers. And like I said, it's not like it's not going to be judging like your animal skills or something like that. A lot of this is going to be like emotional intelligence, communication, verbal and nonverbal skills.
Yeah, I just want to kind of like riff off that really quick. From what I remember, the majority of the questions were not vet related. So they're not trying to like see how much information you know, what your knowledge depth is in the veterinary field. It's purely on your character, your verbal skills, communication skills, and essentially how you interact with a stranger because they are strangers. I want to say most of them were UC Davis affiliates, if not all of them were UC Davis affiliates. And so you may recognize faces if you get into the program, you may not. But it helps because this is not the MMI and the system they use. It's not like it's just some random person that might be not affiliated with UC Davis at all. They are affiliated. They have kind of, they care about your success in the program. They care about who is in the program. And so, you know, it's, I think I had a really good experience with the MMI personally because I knew that. And I personally didn't practice. I think I still had a good experience because, I dealt with, many different personality types in clinic as an assistant, and I felt like that kind of prepared me enough. But I do like that that Riley actually did because, I did get one question that was very off the cuff, and I was like, I have no idea how to answer this. I'm kind of stuck here. But having that time and being okay with like, can I take a few minutes to, just collect myself? Can I you don't have to answer as soon as they finish giving you the question. But you know, that time management does take practice, like Riley was saying.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that, Chantel.
Okay, so this slide right here pretty much goes over how we rank applicants. We did recently move over to a new system. Prior to 2023, we did require the GRE. However, we did replace that with the distance travel score. So I will cover what that is in the next slide. So on the front end of things, there is going to be based on three main criteria. And so the first being is, and the one that's weighed the most heavily is going to be your GPAs. So there are two specific GPAs that we look at for our program. The first GPA is going to be your science GPA. So that's going to be for every single science course you've ever completed. Even if you did take high school courses or college credit courses in high school, that will also be encompassed in that GPA as well. The second GPA we look at is your most recent 45 semester or 68 quarter units. So if you do plan on applying to vet school right after undergrad, that's typically going to be your sophomore and your junior year. However, let's just say you do plan on taking a gap year or two where you do complete the rest of your prerequisite courses, then that will encompass mostly your senior year and then the additional courses that you did take and maybe even some of the courses from your junior year. So the unique thing about both of those GPAs is that there's always ways to enhance it. So if you do need to enhance your GPA significantly, then in that case, we'd recommend first starting off with the prerequisite courses you didn't do so well in, and then possibly considering like a post-bachelor program or a master's program. And if it's the science GPA, that also needs to be improved, making sure that post-bachelor or master's program is science related. However, if you just need to slightly improve your GPA, then in that case, you can either just take additional science courses or retake the courses you didn't do so well in. And then the second part of the admissions ranking is going to be based on your letters of recommendation. As our ambassadors had mentioned, we will take the composite score that you receive from the three, since each of your evaluators will have to complete an evaluation on your behalf. And then we add that composite score to the admissions ranking. And then the final component of the initial admissions ranking is based on the distance travel score. And I will be going over what that is in the next slide. In terms of the holistic review process, so that doesn't happen until applications are ranked. So in the very beginning, I will say it is very much a numbers game, where let's just say we do get 3,000 applications, then applications will be ranked from 1 to 3,000. And then the first 240 people on the list will be called for interviews. The way that our process works, since we are a public land grant university, we are required to have 80% of California residents that we interview. So typically that ends up being around 200 California applicants, or 80% of applicants that have to be interviewed have to be California residents. So that ends up being around 200 California residents, and then typically 40 out-of-state or international applicants. And then we also do take into consideration like an additional 30 as backups, just because with the holistic review process, like if there are any red flags with applicants or anything like that, then they will be removed and then we'll add the next person on that rank. And then our admissions committee will do a deep dive into every single application. I believe I will be covering what exactly that they're looking at in a later slide. And then one thing to mention is right now we do currently have 7 admissions committee members. They're all pretty much all members of UC Davis or their faculty, but we do have one practicing vet as well. And then all of our admissions committee members do also go through an implicit bias training as well. And then from there, once applicants have been ranked, what happens next is you'll be going through the interviews. And then after the interviews, then what we do is we take the score we take the blip score, which consists of the GPAs, the letters of recommendation, and the distance travel score. And then we also incorporate how you did with the MMIs. And then that's how applicants are finally ranked. And then the first, whoever ranks like within the first 155, those will be offered admission. And then we also do have a working wait list during that time as well. And so between January and April, that's when we start getting like the accepts or declines. And then if you are on the wait list, you will know your number, and you will know like once like a student declines and another applicant is added, you'll know where you are in the rank as well. And I will say with the wait list, on average, typically we probably go through around 14 to 15 students, but each year it does vary. There have been years where we haven't went through a single person. There's been years where we went through the entire wait list, but on average, typically it is around 14 students. And we've also noticed the trend typically ends up being out-of-state students that got accepted into their home schools that will typically decline, but it also does vary based on applicant as well. Okay, now this slide pretty much goes over the distance travel score. So this is like a new metric that we take into account an applicant's background and lived experiences. The main reason for it is pretty much to make the process as equitable as possible, just because we do understand that students do come from all different walks of life. And so the factors that we consider for this are like economic factors, environmental factors, educational factors. There's no way to prepare for this part of the application. It's pretty much based on how you fill out your preliminary MCAS application. One question we do get is students assume that distance traveled means literally like the places they've traveled to, and that has nothing to do with it. Like I mentioned, it is based on equity reasons, and then these are the factors that we look at. As you can see, they are a little generalized, and that's just because we don't want students to falsely represent themselves. So we can't necessarily say exactly what that criteria is. Okay, and then for this slide, this is pretty much the steps you take if you weren't accepted into the program. And I briefly already went over this when we were going over the admissions ranking with the GPAs. So based on what you need to do to improve your application, I will say about 80% of the time, it's the GPAs that do need to be improved. So when students do reach out, and when I'm looking at like their initial data for their application. It's the GPAs that typically need to be, sometimes it's a slight improvement that they need, sometimes it's a significant improvement. But you can always just reach out to us and we'll let you know where you are. Also, for every application cycle, we do host a information session similar to this, where we let applicants know what they need to do to enhance their application, to have a more competitive application. And then also just looking at our statistics pages. I will be going over them briefly here as well for the previous class that just entered into our program. But you'll see from there what you need to do to have a competitive application. Sometimes it even does end up being the letters of recommendation. So I will say for our program, a competitive score for the letters of recommendation is typically like a 4.7 to 4.8 out of 5. And then just depending on how much you need to increase your GPA, that might just be retaking courses, taking additional courses. And then if you need a significant bump within those GPAs, then possibly entering into a graduate program. Okay, now this is pretty much the data from our last year's applicant pool. For the class of 2030, we're still working through that data. Our supplemental application actually isn't due until mid-October. So we won't have that information available until honestly April, May, after like we know our finalized class. But last year we did receive over 3,000 applications, and over 2,000 of those were qualified applicants, meaning that they met the minimum requirements for our program. And over here you can see the breakout between California residents and out-of-state residents. And then you'll see like we interviewed a total of 240 applicants, and then offered admissions to 154. And then you'll see based on that, like how many ultimately accepted into the program. So this was a first, this has been our biggest class yet. We did increase the class size to 155. We did have one deferred student, which is why it says 154. But prior to that, it was 150 students. Our ultimate goal is to get to 200 students, 200 students a year. But we do need that's probably going to be a few years down the line. But our hope is to increase the class size by 5, hopefully by every year moving on forward. But we'll see how that goes, just depending on funding and our buildings, infrastructures, and everything like that. So now this slide pretty much goes over the GPAs, the average GPAs. So for last year for California, the overall science GPA, the average was 3.67. And then the most recent 45 semester, 68 quarter units was a 3.78. For non-residents, it was a 3.8 and then a 3.9. You'll see that it is going to be slightly higher for non-residents just because we're only interviewing 40 not out-of-state and international students. And then we also kind of go over like how many first-time applications we had. So we had 130 first-time applications, 20 second-time applications, and then we had 4 students that applied 3 or more times. And then we also do give like an average of students, an average range of students that applied. So if you're not exactly within range, we definitely don't discourage you from applying. So for example, we did accept a student that had a 2.9 overall science GPA. However, their most recent GPA was above the average. It was at a 3.85. And so with this type of applicant, it's assumed that they probably had an extremely competitive ELOR score, so they probably had close to a 5 on that, as well as a competitive distance travel score as well. And then we also did the same thing with whoever had the lowest 45 semester 68 quarter units. That was about a 3.32. And then their overall science GPA was also at a 3.32.
All right, so just getting into that admissions timeline. So the VMCAS portal system will open for applications on January 22nd. And essentially that means that you're able to go in and you're starting to add in all of your classes. That's also the time where you can start. I would recommend starting to ask for those ELORs at that point as well. That gives them ample time with those gentle reminders like Riley was talking about. And then on May 8th, that's the earliest that VMCAS applications can be submitted. So let's say you're really, you got all those ELORs in, you've uploaded all of your coursework, you've got all of your hours. If you think you have a complete application, you can hit submit. It is recommended that you do submit a little earlier than that September 15th, which is that hard deadline where they stop accepting any sort of VMCAS applications. Submitting early gives them time to verify your application. If any changes need to be made, if there's anything you're missing, like there's coursework that either hasn't been verified or you inputted the wrong credits for a class, that is why you should submit a little early so you have a chance to make that change so that your application is accepted, just as the basic requirement. And then October 15th, the supplemental application is due. The supplemental application is going to be different for every program, but for UC Davis SVM, we'll talk about what that looks like. But yeah, October 15th is the supplemental application, and then after that, it's kind of a waiting period for your interview invite. All right, so the admissions decision timeline. So after October 15th, that once that supplemental application is submitted, there's the review process. Then they do send out all of the invites for interviews. So that MMI, the dates for the MMIs this year are December 4th, 5th, 8th, and 9th. And so as we discussed, basically you do pick your day, you also pick your time. They go really fast. So as soon as you get your invite, go and try to, get the best date and time that works for you. But post MMI, like we talked about, there's 240 interviewees, and they are ranked. The first 155 applicants are going to be offered admission, and then there's going to be 40 to 45 applicants that are placed on the waiting list. And from January to April, that's when that ranking does occur. And then April 15th is going, or I guess between January and April, you do get your admissions offer. And then by April 15th, you do have to accept or decline your admission. And so It's almost a year-long process, or about a year-long process, but yeah, essentially from December through April is MMIs and deciding whether or not you want to go to Davis. All right. And so just getting into the four-year curriculum, the first 2 years are didactic, which is essentially you are in lecture, you're getting all of that theory knowledge, you're getting some application through labs and through discussion, but they're really trying to give you a good basis for heading into more emphasized curriculum. There is a lot of comparative. Everyone is together those first 2 years, so a lot of it is essentially, it is the same teaching that we're all getting together. There are also going to be mini rotations where I believe you get 2 per semester of rotation day in the hospital where you're randomly assigned a rotation and you spend a day kind of shadowing a fourth-year student on that rotation. And then once you get into your third year, you get separated into your stream, whether that's large or small animal. Within the large animal stream, it does get broken down even further into equine, livestock, zoologic, or exotics like avian and reptile. And that is where you do learn a more specialized or more tailored and non-comparative curriculum. There are also surgery labs where everyone is getting the same surgical experience in that way, where they're learning how to spay and neuter dogs. And then for large animal, there are some surgeries that are going to be specific to large animal, and then obviously small animal the same. Then for your fourth year, you do clinical rotations. There are, depending on your stream, there are going to be required rotations that everyone has to be on as part of that stream, whether it's small or large animal, and then equine. But then you do also have elective rotations where you essentially get to choose what rotation. If you are a large animal person and you really love dermatology for small animal, then you can decide that you want to do a small animal derm rotation. But that's essentially the gist of the four-year curriculum.
Okay, yeah, so I can go ahead and talk about this slide real quick. So this slide is basically what happens after you finish veterinary school. So if you come in for the traditional DVM program, it is a 4-year program after which you will receive the degree of Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. But that's not all. Once you do finish those 4 years and get your degree, you do need to pass a board certification exam called the NAVLE, and that'll allow you to practice veterinary medicine. Different states may have their own board exams you also have to pass. California does not, so California practicing vets just have to do the NAVLE. But if you were applying to a different school in a different state, definitely make sure you're looking at what state you want to practice in and checking their guidelines to make sure that you're going to complete the proper certifications to practice in that state. After veterinary school as well, many people will choose to either do an internship because they want to just get some more experience before they, get out into the field. They want that really close mentorship. Or sometimes people will do an internship because they're interested in pursuing a particular specialty, such as cardiology or internal medicine, where you do have to complete an internship and then apply to a residency, which is typically around a 3-year program to allow you to earn that board certification in your specialty. Some people even choose to further their knowledge by getting a PhD after the DVM degree. Of course, this degree gives you a lot of opportunities, a lot of different fields to work in. For example, like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm very interested in feline medicine, which basically means I want to work with cats. I can specialize in feline medicine. And it's one of those specializations that does not require an internship or residency. That one is kind of a different way through the DABVP program, where you get certain number of years of experience and gather your caseload. It's a whole different process that, of course, if you're interested in, you can look up and everything. But so it's just, if you have a certain career goal you want to work towards, especially if it's a specialization you want to do, it's good to get an idea of what those requirements are like. So, if you want to do an internship after vet school, if you want to do an internship and apply to residency after vet school, or if you want to go straight into practice after vet school, that's another option as well. I know plenty of people choose to go straight into practice and just make sure that they have good mentors. And it's a good idea when applying to a practice to make sure to tell them what mentorship looks like to you, so you can ensure that you're getting the right support you need if you do choose to go that route.
Can you tell them that do they do residency for free or do they get paid?
Yeah, so you do get paid for a residency program. It's not going to be the same income that you would see from going straight into practice. So that is something to take into consideration. Same with an internship. Internship may be longer hours and less pay, as well as residency. So that might be part of the swaying factor for if you want to pursue an internship or residency or not. I know for me, that's personally how I feel. I am on the fence about if I want to do an internship or not. So I'm trying to take that into account. So yes, you do get paid for those, but you don't get that same starting salary that you do if you go straight into practice. However, if you specialize, depending on what you specialize in, like cardiology or internal medicine, etc., you may make more income as a specialist depending on what field you go into. So while it would be making less money during internship and residency, you may have the opportunity to earn more once you're a specialist.
I know we've run out of time, but I really quickly also do want to emphasize our summer enrichment program. So this takes place every summer, and it is about 4 weeks long. This is especially helpful for students that are looking for veterinary experience, just because you do get over 80 hours of diverse veterinary experience right here on campus. And then these are the minimum requirements for the program. The applications do open in January, and then you have until March to submit them. So I will send out the presentations as well as links to these different programs as well. So if you're interested in applying, definitely do check those out. And then lastly, this is my contact information. And then if you do have any questions, you can email me directly. And we are pretty quick at responding right now. It is a little bit of a busy time just because we have a lot of questions from the applications that were just submitted. But thank you everyone for sticking through the presentation and for staying extra, especially to our ambassadors as well. Thank you for your time and sharing the experiences as well.
Any last words of wisdom, Chantel and Riley?
Yeah, I can go ahead and talk in first. Especially as someone where it did take me 2 application cycles to get in, I just want to really stress that if this is something that you want and you really are dedicated to this, then keep pushing for this. I know, like, when I did my first application cycle and I was not admitted, of course, rejection never feels good. I know I was very, very emotional about the experience, of course, but I picked myself back up and I said, you know what, this is something I really want to do. And so in my case, I didn't end up taking any additional classes, though if I hadn't got in my second cycle, I would have probably gone back to community college to try to just boost my science GPA and take more additional courses. So for what I did was my second gap year, I just really focused on trying to get more hands-on veterinary experience. I tried to focus on writing a better personal statement because in my first cycle, I felt like my personal statement could have been better. And I hadn't utilized the MCAS explanation statement my first time around, and I made use of that statement the second time around. And so I would just say, yeah, it's just about like keeping that goal in sight and not getting too in your head if it doesn't go around the first time. There are so many people who don't get in their first time applying to vet school. There are so many people who don't even get in their second time applying to vet school, which again, I know it's hard, but if you really want it, just keep working towards it, keep doing what you can, and try to hang in there, because I know how it feels. And like I said, I think honestly, applying a second time, I was able to get more experience during my second gap year. I had a better idea of what I want to do in this field and what difference I want to make. And I just felt like it was just a better time overall for me personally to get to vet school.
Thank you, Riley. You hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways. My journey was very different. I am an older student. I actually dropped out of college after the first 2 years, straight out of high school, and then realized I do want to go to college and I do want to go to vet school. So I would say no single path is going to be like the right path. Your journey to vet school and your journey through your education is yours alone, and what you make of it is really it's individual. And so don't take no for an answer. I became the most stubborn person possible. I had people telling me maybe that med isn't for me. Maybe do I want to go to UC Davis? You know, all of those things. And you have to be your number one kind of advocate in that way. It's so easy to get kind of discouraged in this process. It's a very long, it's hard, it's definitely a marathon. It's not a race in any way. So keep in mind what your goal is. If that means you got to have a sticky note on the mirror every single day like I did, then that's just going to be what it is. But it is definitely important to understand that your process is not going to look like someone else's process, and that's okay. That makes you individual and it makes you great.
Thank you so much again for all the advice and your sharing your guys' experience. It was very, very informational. I myself have learned so much about vet school, especially at UC Davis, and like the admissions process. It was so like nicely organized. And honestly, I think sharing both yours and Riley's experience was probably very helpful for future vet doctors.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, and I'm just making a plug. Next week, Dr. Jantry is going to be here as well, so you could ask him all the questions you want as well. Thank you. I'm going to keep the session open for a couple of minutes so you could download all the links. Please don't email us afterwards because we don't there's no way to save them. So whatever we put in the web chat, webinar chat, you could download it as you like. But after this, we close it, it's gone. And I've tried figuring out how to save it, but I haven't been able to. So thank you again, ladies.